Ice on my head, got up a check. Ice on my head, got up a check. Ice on my neck doesn't come in. I'm a pretty boy, I'm stunning. Super speed Sonic, I'm running. Super speed Sonic, I'm running. Call me Big Papa, I'm Sonic. I spot the dick when she want it. I'm a bad boy, make lovin'. I'm a bad boy, make lovin'. Hey, good pussy sound like pasta. I got young dick, call the pastor. She got good brain.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DaCosta and this is Consistent Preterism. Thank you for joining me today. It's great to have you guys. We're going to do a little bit of a break in the Carrier series, the refutation of Dr. Richard Carrier's most pitiful article. We've done 2 segments so far and the response has been, well, let's just say Carrier's curly hair is buried in the dirt so far you can't even see the very top curl. He has nowhere to go. He's been refuted and defeated 1,000 times over, but we're not done. We're coming back with 2 more episodes. It's a 4-part series in total, and we're going to continue to bury his points in the dirt because he does get into a couple things on like Adam, and it's a good opportunity for me to grab him by his cankles and pull him back into the context and and explain Adam in the proper law perspective that it needs to be understood. So we will come back to that. But what I wanted to do is step away briefly because I know everybody's got ADD out there and we lose focus pretty quickly unless there's something new that comes up, a new little butterfly that flies by. But the butterfly today is going to be Dr. Don K. Preston, and that butterfly is going to be smashed, unfortunately. Now, I love animals. I have dogs. I cherish them. They're the apple of my eye, like Israel was to the God of Israel. But I would never hurt a butterfly. But it was a good metaphor or analogy to describe what's going to happen to Don K. Preston today. And the only reason why I'm looking back at some of Don K. Preston's recent work is because a guy, go figure, his name's Guy, I think his last name's Rawlings, or if that's just, I don't know, a pseudonym. But Guy Rawlings has asked me to take a look at this, and he's not saying it's convincing. He just says that Don makes some statements in there that are ironic and, of course, out of context and applies them to people today in his weird, everything's fulfilled, but it's all still happening viewpoint. And so he wanted me to address this, and so that's what I'm going to do. Now, I'll be dead honest with you. I haven't even listened to a peep of this, right? Not even a peep. I'm going to do it completely off the cuff. There's absolutely no notes. I have Isaiah pulled up because I'm just going to quickly explain to you guys what's going on in Isaiah 60 through 66 specifically, and we'll read some of it. We'll have a good old time with it. But we're going to do it in a typical critique format. I believe I see 3 segments on his channel, each about 10 to 15 minutes long. So I'll probably skim through those and just give you guys the skim view or the skim refutation, why he's wrong, because it's not going to be very hard, right? This guy is so inconsistent. This is the guy that believes that the donkeys and the camels that are bringing back the children of Israel to Jerusalem in Isaiah, I think it's 65 and 66, is actually spiritual symbolism for what people are doing today. Somehow, spiritually, Christians are being carried on spiritual donkeys and spiritual mules and taken to a spiritual it's banana sandwich, all right? And so you really got to go way out in left field with these imaginations and maybe trip on acid a little bit to get where Don is in these chapters of these Old Testament prophets, because really it's 100% all about Old Covenant Israel and the literal city, the literal temple, literal Jerusalem being literally rebuilt, the literal Israelites being literally brought back on camels and mules, and again, literally sacrificing, literally doing the whole incense thing, literally slaughtering goats, and literally having Levites, and literally having priests. And Isaiah called this a new heaven and new earth, the return to Zion, second temple period and restoration. Jeremiah called it the new covenant made with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Ezekiel called it the 2 sticks being grafted together, right? And they were all talking about Israel coming back from the nations, from their places of captivity, and re-inheriting the Jerusalem, right? The new heavens, new earth, the new creation. And so that was what all these prophets had their focus on. Now, ironically, when we get to the New Testament times, the last days of Israel, we see again this pattern is being repeated, okay? Only this time, they're being taken to a new Jerusalem, which is made in the heavens without hands, right? They're being transformed to this new city that only has the 12 tribes' names written on it, where they'll always be with their shepherd. They'll not have any more death, pain, tears. They'll follow the shepherd wherever he goes, these lambs, these sheep. And so you have this final ride off into the sunset scene where they're taken away in these glorified Jesus-like angelic bodies, okay? And that's the final scene. You don't see anything beyond that, despite what people may try to make the story say. You don't see it. It's a happy ending. The little VN pops up, the director, the producer, the actors, all the names start scrolling up. It's that, okay? That's what happens when they ride off to their New Jerusalem. And so Don here has a really odd way of describing these Old Testament times, right? Like he says that they're applicable to us today in 2020 as we gear up to watch NFL football today. Today's Sunday, by the way. Anyways, so what I want to do is I want to just let Donnie Boy's stuff play out a little bit here. Bear with it if you're bored. It's 14 minutes, the first one. I may or may not let the whole thing go. But when he makes points, I'm going to stop it, offer up a little commentary until I bury this thing in the dirt enough where I feel comfortable just walking away from it, because clearly Don K. Preston is, he's probably a decent human being, honestly, and I've met the guy, and he actually published one of my books, and so I do know a little bit about the guy. But he's just not the most honest of individuals. Let's put it that way. I mean, you're over here talking about Matthew chapter 24 for literally 400 YouTube segments. I mean, that's over a year. He put probably over a year into Matthew 24, which I could teach you guys in 30 minutes. And it's actually on my site. Just Google Jason DaCosta Matthew 24. You'll get a 40-something minute, maybe an hour at max teaching, which explains Matthew 24 in its entirety. So Donnie turned that into a year, right? Made something so simple into a year. All the while, IO is just growing and growing and growing, and it's eating and eating and eating, and it's becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And before you know it, anybody who gets to full preterism is going to instantly see IO. And that's the direction that it's heading. But Donnie wants nothing to do with it, doesn't address it, hasn't said a peep about it, won't let IOers comment on his videos, which is laughable. Doesn't want to engage, right? I would right now agree to a 5-part series. Right now, if Don would agree to it, I would absolutely say yes to a 5-part YouTube exchange. Doesn't have to be anytime soon. It can be over the next few months because I'm busy too. But I would agree to a 5-part exchange, and we can make it any topic that Don wants. Any topic, right? We can make it about Romans 11 since he's written a book on that chapter, specifically the fullness of the nations. We can do a 5-part exchange, maximum 30 minutes each part on YouTube. He can go first, I'll follow, or I can go first, he'll follow. And then we can prove and disprove each other in this sort of format, because this is honestly the best way to do it, because people can remember the remarks and the points, and they can see the opponent's view and why they don't agree. And they can make the decision, right? And I guarantee you that this will not go good for Don. Okay, we can do it on anything. We can do it on, does salvation continue post 70 AD? I would love to do that. We could do it on God's chosen people and who actually is Abraham's seed. I would love to do it on that. We can take any topic that Don wants, a second coming, whatever. And we can debate it here in a 5-part series. So let Donnie know. I'm sure he'll ignore you and say we're not worthy, or the view's not worthy, or it's a godless doctrine, right? He's got all the typical comebacks why he doesn't want to do this. But again, it's just more of the same stuff. Carrier backed away from IO. I went on Derek's channel and I commented saying, I challenge Richard Carrier to come right here, just him and I, one-on-one, and we'll shoot some comments back and forth in short, concise little formats so that people can follow along and see who has the better arguments. And it's been 3 days and I got nothing. So it just goes to show you, nobody wants the smoke, all right? Nobody wants the smoke. So let's begin looking through Don K. Preston's stuff, and we'll have a gay old time, as they say. So he's going to start right here. Let me turn the volume up.
We are continuing our study of the Olivet Discourse. Is it divided or is it united?
Oh, okay. So he's still on the Olivet Discourse. I thought it was over and he was moving on to Isaiah 62. I guess I'm wrong. I'm looking at the title here, and it says The Olivet Discourse, number 356. Now, you do the math, folks. Donnie does about 5, maybe 4 morning musings per week, somewhere in that range, and he's got 356 of these bad guys on Matthew 24. Let's just divide that by 5. 71 weeks Donnie Boy has been on the Matthew 24 series on his YouTube channel, which, by the way, he's done countless conferences, countless YouTube presentations, countless debates on Matthew 24. He might as well just call himself Matthew 24ism because that's all he talks about. But so we're still on it, but I guess he's doing little like subtopics, subcategories within Matthew 24. And so we're on Isaiah 62. So here he goes.
Is it one subject, i.e. the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, the Lord's coming, the end of the Old Covenant?
I like Donnie, too. Like, look at him. He doesn't give a shit. He's in the basement. He's got a dirty curtain behind him. The little modem or whatever he's got there in the back on his left side is all dusty. He don't care. He's not dusting. He's got some, like, old headset hanging up, a Mustang car behind him, some, like, eagle statue that probably has an inch of dust on it. And he's just teaching. He does not give a shit about nothing. And I respect that. Here he goes.
Age at that time? Or is it 2 subjects? The fall of Jerusalem in AD 70 and the so-called imaginary, in my estimation, end of time, the end of the endless Christian age. Which is it? Well, we have been focusing on Matthew 25, 1 to 13. And Jesus' parable of the coming of the bridegroom and the story of the 5 wise and the 5 foolish virgins. Do you know that I have encountered people?
We're going to skip that because he's just talking about preterism.
You see, Preston, and coming at the end of the new covenant. So
we're trying to get to Isaiah.
I have had them say, look, Preston, you in my mouth, look. That proverbial, very obvious and the very undeniable realities of what the Bible says I was in my early ministry. And gentlemen, I was raised in an environment that said...
Okay, so he's still yapping.
Years ago, I was sitting in my office...
Still waiting.
...that there is literally about to be the resurrection thought. Now, this is very, very early in my Church of Christ, folks. Of it, not a bit of it, all of it. So if all of a sudden someone wants to jump up and say...
So we're about halfway through this. I've fast forwarded it so that we can get to the actual meat and potatoes of Isaiah 62, but I'm still unable to see that he's talking about it. So bear with me as I keep gliding through here.
Well, believing all things,
Come on.
The fulfillment of the law and the prophet. I was just blown away.
Come on.
To Brother Lockwood, I didn't answer, or didn't give them back.
All right, so Donnie's lost his marbles on this one, apparently, and he's just yapping. We're about 10 minutes in. The thing is 14 minutes long, and we haven't talked about Isaiah 62 yet. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pause this, I'm going to link it up, cue it up, and I'll be right back. All right, so it looks like I finally found it. He's going to talk about Isaiah 62 here with about 2 minutes left in the video. Let's see what he says.
Folks, I said all that, and all of this is basically introduction to Isaiah 62.
Okay. So if you're wondering what he said, he just gave a basic full preterist, explanation. Like all these things were about to take place. Jesus is coming, was coming soon. That's all he does. So that's what my channel says anyway. So there's nothing new there. We need to hear what he says Isaiah 62 is actually saying.
When I discovered what Paul said, I began to make it my goal to understand the Old Testament well enough so that I knew the Old Testament well enough. And I still work on this every single day. I wanted to know the Old Testament well enough so that when I read the teaching of Jesus, I didn't even have to have my center column references. I would hear the echo of those Old Testament prophecies that he was drawing from. Now, mind you, I consider a good center column reference or bottom reference of Bible to be invaluable. And I use them. Hope you do too. But I discovered that Isaiah 62 is one of the most powerful and one of the most wonderful Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel about the consummation of eschatology to be found. So beginning tomorrow, we're going to be looking at Isaiah 62 and what it predicted and prophesied, and how Jesus quoted from that text, as well as, by the way, Isaiah 40, and how Revelation 22 and Jesus in Revelation 22 quoted verbatim from Isaiah 62 to speak of the things that were to shortly come to pass. This is an incredible study. So I'll see you on the flip side.
So Donnie there finishes off this first segment, and he's letting people know that he's going to show you, he's going to show how Jesus and Revelation quote things from Isaiah. And therefore, it means that everything in those chapters. So what he does is he says, look, Christ quoted something from Isaiah. Therefore, everything in Isaiah, let's just call it 62, has to be literally coming to fruition when Jesus spoke that. And that's the wrong way to do the Bible, obviously, right? We know that the New Testament writers and characters oftentimes would refer back to an Old Testament passage to sort of shine light upon what was taking place in their day, right? It doesn't mean that literal Jerusalem was being rebuilt and its walls were being raised again and children were again playing in the streets and crops were growing, all things that Isaiah spoke of, by the way, in these chapters that Don thinks was in AD 70 or relevant to that time frame. No, right? It means that Jesus is pulling something from Israel's poetic, historic, and victorious record, and he's letting people know in the first century that this is what's happening. In other words, this is a duplicate of that. Okay? He's using examples from Israel's history to convey a message to Israel in the last days. It's just that simple. All right? Paul does it as well. Over and over and over again, Paul quotes passages. He had a whole discourse on the two sticks, right? The two branches coming together in Romans 11. Talks about it at length. Well, does that mean that everything from Isaiah chapter 37 or 36, Ezekiel 36 or 37 was actually coming to pass in Paul's day? No. Because Ezekiel 36 and 37 literally talk about physical human beings coming back to the land of Jerusalem, the temple being rebuilt, the ruins being restored, and all sorts of imagery in that regard, the law being brought back, right? And this is the second temple return to Zion. That glorious period that Israel was supposed to come back and build the temple and again take claim of the law and be God's people and he would again be their God and so on and so forth. Paul, of course, wasn't saying any of that, but Paul's referring to that and saying, hey, this is what's going on, right? Remember the Old Testament prophets, how they spoke of these things? This is what's going on. God is restoring Israel, right? Pretty clear stuff. But Don is going to try to make a mountain out of a molehill with that and tell you that everything in Isaiah 62 is fulfilled in AD 70 when we know, according to the story, the saints went bye-bye, right? They floated up to heaven in new angelic bodies, snatched away in the blink of an eye. According to the story, of course. So let's go on to Donnie Boy's next teaching here. And we're going to look at Isaiah 62.
Brett Favre here.
This is one of his ads, so bear with me.
Where it is you're working out. If so,
we'll skip that. No penny for you, Donnie.
Good morning, everyone.
And here he is.
Wednesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Music.
This one's only
My name is
11
Dr.
minutes,
Preston.
which
I'm
is
the
nice.
President of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. All right, we are continuing our study of Matthew 24 and 25. We are focused on Matthew chapter 25, the parable of the coming of the bridegroom. the 5 wise and the 5 foolish virgins. My focus in our discussion has been and continues to be
a year later,
demonstrating that the promise of the coming of the Lord as the bridegroom would be in fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. Meaning that it is not a coming of the Lord at the end of the Christian age. It is...
You know, what's funny, though, is that Don's obsession with Matthew 24 actually proves Israel only true, right? Like, this guy's been talking about Matthew 24 here for 71 weeks. Think about that. 71 weeks he's been talking about Matthew 24 on YouTube, right? On his morning musings. 71 weeks, a year and a half, basically. Excuse me. And all he's doing is tying Israel's old promises to Matthew 24. That's legitimately all he's doing. Of course, he tries to put his own little extra whipped cream and cherry on top by saying, oh, but look, the word nations is used over here, therefore that's about us, right? Of course, we know that's nonsense. It's non-existent. It's just not there. This was all about Israel. But point is 90 to 95% of Don's material ties the Old Testament promises to Israel, and he'll admit that. He's admitted that. This is a guy who actually admits that the Great Commission is completely fulfilled, right? He has to. He realizes he's contextually bound to that belief. He has to. But yet he still believes in the Lord's Supper and baptism and, Jesus or whoever said, do this, take this cup in remembrance of me until I come. Well, if you already came, what are you doing, right? You're just playing around, playing church. But the point is that Don's obsession with Matthew 24 and tying it every which way to the Old Testament, which he does a fairly decent job of, if he wasn't, so narcissistic about the story, me, it's actually proving I.O.'s point. Because the entire Bible is I.O. Let's continue.
It's not about the Lord marrying the church divorced from Israel. It is the fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. And as I suggested to you yesterday, Isaiah 62 is one of those Old Testament prophecies that just put my head to spinning round and around and around when I looked at it.
It's funny because his hair is all out of place too, so you can actually believe that.
When I read it, when I meditated on it, when I realized how often the New Testament writers focus on it.
Now, again, proving my point, right? How Don is telling you how often these New Testament writers focus on Old Testament texts that are 100% all about Israel, her salvation, her restoration, etc. It's blowing Don's head, right? He said his head spun around when he realized how often these New Testament writers quote the Old Testament. Well, that's because they were quoting passages that were all about Israel. So if I can show you today, quickly, and I'm going to, that Isaiah 60 to 66, in fact, the whole book of Isaiah, but specifically 60 to 66 is all about Israel's return to Zion, Second Temple period, then Donnie's got no argument, right? He's dead in the water. But let's continue. His head's spinning.
Now, I want to thank everyone for being patient with our study. I especially want to thank everyone who watches the videos and who send me private messages saying, keep pointing out the connections. Keep bringing up those Old Testament prophecies and how the New Testament uses them.
Yes, please keep bringing them up.
Don't slow down. Don't abbreviate. So I appreciate that. Well, I want to tell you, Isaiah 62 is one of those chapters that we could spend months, I believe.
Of course. You've spent years on Matthew 24.
Developing, but I'm not going to do that.
Thank God.
I'm simply going to hit, in some instances, I'm going to reiterate some of the points that I've made already, but to drive home the point that what Jesus was predicting in Matthew chapter 25 is what Isaiah 62 was predicting. Now, I want to introduce very quickly, very succinctly as possible, an argument for you to consider as we proceed. Number one, Isaiah 62 foretold the coming of the Lord with his salvation at the time of the wedding. In Matthew 16, 27 and 28.
All right, let's just see. Matthew 62, right? Because I just want to see if his claims are correct. Now, I just want to give you a little bit of a backstory here, right? Because he's talking about Isaiah 62, right? Well, Isaiah 60, let's go back a couple so we can kind of catch this in its flowing context and catch the theme and the motif and everything that's running through these chapters. And trust me, Isaiah 60, and we're going to get to 62, but Isaiah 60 is literally a place where every single person goes. Don Preston goes, William Bell goes, that pervert, what's his name, Ward Fenley, he goes there all the time. He actually taught a whole series on Isaiah 60, or a whole teaching on it, and someone sent it to me laughing because he's actually using this passage that I'm about to share with you as proof that, the nations are coming to Christ today. This is what he does. But let's read Isaiah 60, verse 1. It says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and deep darkness the people. But the Lord will arise over you, and his glory will be seen upon you." Here it is. "The Gentiles shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising." Okay? Now, first of all, this is pretty incredible because this is literally Genesis language here. And just remember that. Mark that. We're going to come back to that point. But here we have, this is about Jerusalem, folks. This is about the restoration of Second Temple Jerusalem. Okay? The Israelites had been dispersed. They'd been taken captive, right? They were in Babylon. They were all over, according to the story. Both houses, according to the prophets. And God is promising to bring them back to the land, the promised land, Jerusalem. Rebuild it, restore it, rebuild the desolate ruins, erect a new temple, bring back the people of Israel, his chosen, his elect. This is what the whole thing is about. So here he says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you." This is Jerusalem. This is the promised land he's talking about. He says, "For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and deep darkness the people. But the Lord will arise over you, and his glory shall be seen upon you." Now, isn't that amazing that in the beginning we see in Genesis that darkness was over the face of the deep, right? And then the Lord said, "Let there be light." Right? So there's a lot of Genesis imagery there in Isaiah. And in my opinion, Genesis is just the creation of Israel, hence my book, The Genesis of Israel. But "Arise, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and deep darkness the people. But the Lord will arise over you, and his glory will be seen upon you. The Gentiles shall come to your light, and the kings to the brightness of your rising." Now, first of all, let's read a little bit more just so I can explain what the prophet is actually saying here. Verse 4, "Lift up your eyes all around and see, they all gather together, they come to you. Your sons shall come from afar, and your daughters shall be nursed at your side. Then you shall see and become radiant, and your heart shall swell with joy, because the abundance of the sea shall be turned to you. The wealth of the Gentiles shall come to you. The multitude of camels shall cover your land. The dromedaries of Midian and Ephah, all those from Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and incense, and they shall proclaim the praises of the Lord. All the flocks of Kedar shall be gathered to you. The rams of Nebaioth shall minister to you. They shall ascend with acceptance on my altar, and I will glorify the house of my glory." Now, what is it saying that the Gentiles shall come to your light? Well, he's talking about the nations, okay? Again, the nations. They would come to Jerusalem. This is about Jerusalem, the city. And kings would come to the brightness of her rising. They will all gather together and come to you. Your sons shall come from afar, and your daughters shall be nursed at your side. Because the abundance of the sea shall be turned to you, the wealth of the nations, Gentiles, shall come to you. The multitude of camels, the dromedaries, incense, gold. The wealth of the nations shall come to you, folks. Right? Think about that. This is all documented in Ezra and Nehemiah, I believe. I'm pretty sure it's those two books. It talks about the nations, the wealth of the nations being brought to Jerusalem to rebuild the magnificent temple. All the money that it took to rebuild that temple and that city came from the nations. And this is exactly what Isaiah is speaking of here. The wealth of the nations, not people. It's not talking about people being converted to Christ. Okay, it's talking about the literal wealth of the nations shall come to you, Jerusalem. The multitude of camels will cover your land, it says. They'll bring gold and incense. This is the wealth coming from the nations. And they'll proclaim the praises of the Lord. Okay. Now, he goes on, he says, and who are these that fly like a cloud and like doves to their roosts? Surely the coastland shall wait for me, and the ships of Tarshish will come first, to bring your sons from afar, their silver and their gold with them, to the name of the Lord your God, and to the Holy One of Israel, because he has glorified you. Ready for this? Verse 10, the sons of foreigners shall build up your walls. Still talking about the city here. And their kings shall minister to you. For in my wrath I struck you, but in my favor I have had mercy on you. Therefore your gates shall be open continually. Again, this is Jerusalem. This is the people coming back to Jerusalem in the Second Temple period, and their kings in procession. For the nation and the kingdom which will not serve you shall perish, and those nations shall be utterly ruined. Again, this is all about Jerusalem and not some, conversion into Christ nonsense. Okay? The glory of Lebanon shall come, the cypress, the pine, the box tree all together, to beautify the place of my sanctuary. Again, all about the wealth of the nations coming to Jerusalem. And you shall drink the milk of the Gentiles and milk the breasts of kings. You shall know that I, the Lord, am your Savior and your Redeemer, the mighty one of Jacob. Again, another ode to Jacob there. And notice that your gates will be continually open. Well, that's in Revelation. And all that's referring to is this new city, this new Jerusalem that they were going to. That's all. It's just a play on words. It doesn't mean that people are coming in, for all time. Right? Let's see. We're pretty much done in that one. But I just wanted to show you that all Isaiah chapter 60 is literally all about the return to Zion Second Temple period. When we go into Isaiah 61, we read about this news of salvation, right? Verse 4, it says, and they shall rebuild the old ruins. They shall raise up the former desolations, and they shall repair the ruined cities. Does anybody think this is a spiritual reality, or is this actually cities being rebuilt? He goes on, the desolations of many generations. Strangers shall stand and feed your flocks, and the sons of the foreigner shall be your plowmen and your vine dressers. Now, you know how hard the work of a plowman and vine dresser is, right? In the sun all day, sweating, toiling. Well, the strangers and the sons of the foreigner would be theirs, right? This is the people of Israel. People are serving them. It goes on, then they shall call you the servants of our God. You shall eat the riches of the Gentiles. That's kind of interesting. And in their glory you will boast. And instead of confusion, they shall rejoice in their portion. Speaking of them, therefore in their land they shall possess double. Everlasting joy shall be there. So he's talking about Israel coming back to their land. Get your mind off of the specifics of how that could look or how that could be, and just enjoy the poetic, victorious imagery that's being put forth here. Doesn't have to be strict wooden literal. It's just poetry. Okay? For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery. For burnt offering, I will direct their work in truth and will make them an everlasting covenant. Their descendants shall be known among the Gentiles. Again, Gentiles are a horrible word, just meaning nations. And their offspring among the people. All who see them shall acknowledge them, that they are the posterity whom the Lord has blessed. Gosh, that's pretty powerful. Okay? But let's go to Isaiah 62 and see what Donnie's talking about Jesus coming as a bridegroom. Okay? Let me just read it here because I got to go through it. For as a young man marries a virgin, this is verse 5, so shall your sons marry you. And as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so shall your God rejoice over you. I have set watchmen on your walls, O Jerusalem. They shall never hold their peace day or night. You who make mention of the Lord, do not keep silent and give him no rest till he establishes, until he makes Jerusalem a praise in the earth. This was all about Jerusalem, the promised land. Okay? He goes on, go through the gates, prepare the way for the people, build up the highways, take out the stones, lift up a banner for the peoples. Indeed, the Lord has proclaimed to the end of the world, say to the daughter of Zion, Zion's Jerusalem, say to the daughter of Zion, the people of Israel, surely your salvation is coming. Behold, his reward is with him and his work before him. And they shall call them the holy people, the redeemed of the Lord. And you shall not be sought out, a city not forsaken. So what is Don even doing? We don't even have to go any further in his video. We will for a little while. But what is he doing quoting this about some spiritual AD 70 aspect? It makes no sense. This was 100% all about the Second Temple period, where these Israelites would be brought back to a literal rebuilt city and temple, and they would dwell and thrive in the land again. Again, poetic, hopeful imagery, expectation, goals, victorious language. That's all it is. Now, it could have even been written well after the fact, and someone just writing about it in a poetic, victorious type of way. There's a lot of ways that it could have been written. But the content is what needs to be taken focus of. Let's see what else Donnie says here about Isaiah 62.
Jesus foretold his coming for salvation at the time of the kingdom, which is the time of the wedding. Matthew chapter 25, 1 to 13.
Bless you.
Pardon me.
You're pardoned.
Matthew 25, 1 to 13 is parallel to Matthew 16, 27 and 28. Meaning that the coming of the Lord, the coming of the bridegroom for his bride, for the wedding of Matthew 25, would occur when Matthew 16, 27 and 28 would be fulfilled.
Isn't it interesting how he says, meaning the coming of the bride, the coming of the bridegroom for his bride would occur in AD 70. That's his whole argument. Well, if the coming of the bridegroom for his bride already occurred in AD 70, then how is Donnie wearing that nice white lace wedding dress, wedding gown that he wants to be in so badly? How is he wearing that today? How is he the bride of Christ?
But Matthew 16, 27 and 28 would be fulfilled, as Jesus said, there are some standing here, which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Well, the coming of the Lord in his kingdom, number one, is the time of the coming of the Lord in judgment. Number two, the coming of the Lord in his kingdom is the time of the wedding.
He's still correct there. He's good in his fulfilled eschatology, but this extra cherry on top stuff's not going to cut it.
Revelation 19 and 20 and 21 and 22. Therefore, the coming of the Lord at the time of the wedding of Matthew 25 was to be in the lifetime of that first century generation. Meaning, Matthew 25 was to be fulfilled in AD 70, meaning the Olivet Discourse cannot be divided. And that all of those commentators who completely divorce Matthew 25, pun intended, from God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel to be fulfilled at the climax of her covenant age.
God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel to be fulfilled at the end of her age, yet somehow this has to do with you and I today in 2020.
Are simply wrong. Okay, Isaiah 62.
Oh, here we go.
For Zion's sake I will not hold my peace. For Jerusalem's sake I will not rest until her righteousness goes forth as brightness, her salvation as a lamp that burns. Okay, we could stop right there. As I have suggested to you, ladies and gentlemen, the subject of the redemption of Zion is one of the key Old Testament salvation messianic prophecies. But the Lord promised that in the last days he would put salvation in Zion. Isaiah 46:13.
See, he mistakenly says in the last days. The last days, according to the Bible, were not in the Second Temple period. That was the restoration of literal physical Jerusalem. But the last days were the New Testament days, the destruction of the temple and the rapturing of the saints up to heaven. That's where he goes wrong. So he's viewing Isaiah 62. He's jumping right over the second temple return to Zion, which that is all about, as I've showed clearly. And if you want, read Ezra and Nehemiah and look at how the wealth of the nations is coming to Jerusalem. And then go back and read Isaiah 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, and 66. Probably even earlier, 50s, I bet. And tell me why that's not the same thing. Right? Surely Ezra and Nehemiah's day was not the last days. So why is Isaiah 62 the last days? Doesn't make any sense.
Zion would be the locus of the new covenant, which is the new marriage covenant.
Interestingly enough, there were many covenants. There was a covenant with Adam. There was a covenant with Noah. There was a covenant with Abraham. There was a covenant with Moses. There was a covenant with David. There was a covenant with Jesus, of course. And we know that when Israel came back from the lands, back to the Second Temple period, which Isaiah 62 is speaking of, Jeremiah actually called that a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Right? He said he would write his laws on their hearts and minds, Jeremiah 30 and 31. Yeah, that's about coming back from Babylonian captivity. It says it flat out. That was the time frame that these prophets looked forward to or wrote about, perhaps even before or, like some people believe, after the fact. But that's what they wrote about.
Hosea 2:18 and following. Zion is the locus of the resurrection. And now watch this. Look, I am abbreviating so much it's painful. But in Hebrews chapter 12, 21 and following, after the writer said, "You have not approached Mount Sinai," to abbreviate and paraphrase, "but you have come to Mount Zion." Folks, they had been waiting for,
that's just the New Jerusalem,
for the fulfillment of the Zion prophecies. Oh, and what did Isaiah 60:22 say?
See, this is where Don goes wrong. He's conflating the two, right? Clearly in the Old Testament prophets, the Zion is a physical, literal Jerusalem that was going to be restored and rebuilt. It says it flat out 100 times. There is no arguments, right? This is why Donnie would never engage on this point. We can do this in the 5-part exchange too if you want. Let him know. I'd be glad to. Any prophet he wants. But that's why Donnie doesn't argue this point. But he's making them the same thing when they shouldn't be. There's the old Jerusalem that they came back to, called Zion. And there's Mount Zion, the heavenly Jerusalem, the city not made with hands of the New Testament last days. That only had the 12 tribes' names written on it, by the way. But that's another story.
Well, when the time arrived, when the appointed time arrived, God would hasten its fulfillment. Here's the writer of Hebrews saying, "You have come to Mount Zion." And yet futurists say, well, yeah, okay, in some way, somehow, we've arrived at Zion, but we've been waiting for 2,000 years. Well, that means that God brought to the time of birth and did not bring forth, violating Isaiah 66.
Isaiah 66, violating Isaiah 6. Let's go read Isaiah 66 just real quick, just so I can give you guys a little taste of how this is still all about Second Temple return, right? Here we go. Hear the word of the Lord, verse 5. "You who tremble at his word, you brethren who hated you, your brethren who hated you, who cast out you for my name's sake. Let the Lord be glorified, that we may see your joy, but they be ashamed. The sound of noise from the city, a voice from the temple, the voice of the Lord, who fully repays his enemies. Before she was in labor, she gave birth. Before her pain came, she delivered a male child. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to give birth in one day, or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion was in labor, she gave birth to her children. Shall I bring to the time of birth and not cause delivery? Shall I, who cause delivery, shut up the womb? Rejoice with Jerusalem and be glad with her, all you who love her. Rejoice with joy for her, all you who mourn for her, that you may feed and be satisfied with the consolation of her bosom, that you may drink deeply and be delighted with the abundance of her glory. For thus says the Lord, behold, I will extend peace to her like a river, and the glory of the nations like a flowing stream. Then you shall feed. On her sides shall you be carried and be dandled on her knees, as one who comforts his mother. As one whom his mother comforts, so I will comfort you, and you shall be comforted in Jerusalem. When you see this, your heart shall rejoice, and your bones shall flourish like grass. The hand of the Lord shall be known to his servants, and his indignation to his enemies. For behold, the Lord will come with fire, and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. And for by the fire and by his sword the Lord will judge all flesh. And the slain of the Lord shall be many. Again, just judgment language. This is all it is. God saving his people from the hand of the enemies, which he did with Cyrus, right? Those who sanctify themselves and purify themselves to go to the garden after an idol in the midst, eating swine's flesh and the abomination and the mouse, shall be consumed together. Verse 18, here it comes. For I know their works and their thoughts. It shall be that I will gather all nations and tongues, and they shall come and see my glory. Speaking of Jerusalem's glory, I will set a sign among them, and those among them who escape I will send to the nations, to Tarshish, Pul, and Lud, who draw the bow, and Tubal and Javan, to the coastlands afar off, who have not heard my fame nor seen my glory, and they shall declare my glory among the nations. Then they shall bring all your brethren for an offering to the Lord out of all nations, on horses and in chariots and in litters, on mules, on camels, to my holy mountain Jerusalem, says the Lord, as the children of Israel bring an offering in a clean vessel to the house of the Lord. And I will take some of them for priests and Levites, says the Lord. So here we can see that, again, this is literally about the glory of Jerusalem going out to the nations and them bringing back from the nations the sons and daughters as a holy offering on mules and camels and chariots and horses to his holy mountain Jerusalem. And he gives the example like the children of Israel bringing a clean offering to the house of the Lord. He's going to take them for priests and for Levites, it says. Notice what he says next. He says, for as the new heavens and new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, so shall your descendants and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all flesh shall come worship before me. And they shall go forth and look upon the corpses of the men who have transgressed against me, for their worm does not die and their fire is not quenched. They shall be an abhorrence to all flesh. Again, contextually, we can see clearly that this is the return to Zion Second Temple period. New moons are there. Sabbath days are there. They'll all come to worship at the temple is there. Okay, this is not AD 70. This is not a spiritual reality. There are Levites and priests being taken from the children of Israel who are gathered back and brought back to the land. And we know that the Israelites did come back in waves, well, according to the Bible, and actually some historical sources refer back to the return to Zion, an event in Israel's history where thousands of Israelites came back to the city in the Second Temple era. Right? So we know that this is actually true in some capacity. I'm not saying it's as glorious and as, poetic as it sounds here, but chances are whoever wrote this was actually writing about an event that had taken place. Right? Unless you believe this was actually prophetic and somebody wrote ahead of time. But the point is that none of these passages that Donnie Boy quotes from the end of Isaiah have any relevance to him or you or myself today. Let's continue.
No, that's not right.
Oh, it's
so
not?
Here we have at the beginning of Isaiah chapter 62, the promise of the time of the redemption of Zion. And
Okay.
folks, when you see that term, the redemption and the salvation of Zion, think kingdom, think salvation, think resurrection, think remarriage.
Just think Jerusalem, Old Covenant Jerusalem, and a brick temple. That's what you have to think, actually, in Isaiah.
Think in one word. We have the summary of all of Israel's eschatological promises.
Israel's eschatological promise. I love how he's like 95% IO. Cherry on
Here
top.
we have the New Testament testifying, you have come to Mount Zion. And you have John reiterating and emphasizing.
Again, all these New Testament writers are doing, folks, is pulling from Israel's old history, old texts, Old Testament texts, and referring to events of old that God performed for their ancestors. That's it. Right? Events of old where they came back to Zion, Jerusalem, the literal land, Here we have in this spiritual, supernatural last days period of the New Testament, we have him saying, you've now come to Mount Zion, the city in the heavens, not made with hands, that sort of thing. So in other words, it's a new Jerusalem, which of course Revelation calls it, because when old Jerusalem fell, then he saw New Jerusalem coming down like a bride out of heaven, right? So the bride language was always related to Jerusalem. And I personally believe that there is some connection in the Adam and Eve representing Israel view, that Eve could be, she's the bride, Eve could be related to Jerusalem. Eve could be the city somehow, right? And the New Jerusalem was the mother of them all, I think Paul called her. So there's some connections there, although I don't think there's enough to really draw out anything just yet. Maybe more things will fall into place as time goes on, which seems to always happen. So hopefully there's more there to that. But I think there's something to be said about Eve, right, being related to the bride, which was Jerusalem, right? And then the New Jerusalem is that new bride prepared for God. I don't know what yet. I'm not putting my heels in the sand on it yet, but I think there's something there. But anyways, we're getting off topic. Let's go back to Donnie Boy.
With urgency, I saw the New Jerusalem, Zion, coming down from God out of heaven as a bride. You see, in Isaiah 62, Zion is to be the bride.
Correct. It's just a theme that's repeated over and over again. And it actually proves I.O., doesn't it? Because here you are in the New Testament last days, and you have all these prophets and writers actually using things that are just related to Israel, right? He's referring to coming to Mount Zion, which was a promise that Israelites fulfilled and had back in the Old Covenant. So why wouldn't it be related to those in the New? Or in the last days, I should say.
John said, I saw the New Jerusalem adorned as a bride for her husband. And in 22:6, that the God of the prophets has spoken these things, says these things must shortly come to pass. Revelation 22:10, do not seal the words of the prophecy of this book. The time is at hand. Verse 11, let the righteous remain righteous. Let the wicked remain wicked.
Let's try to jump forward and see if he says anything.
We have this summary word that encapsulates the entirety of Israel's eschatological hope and the hope of the nations.
There it is. And
your hope and mine.
Your hope and mine. With no scripture to back it up.
For Zion's sake, I will not hold my peace. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not rest until her righteousness goes forth as brightness. And so in Revelation, in this new Jerusalem, no need of the sun, no need of the moon, because the lamp is the light thereof that enlightens all people. Oh my goodness gracious.
Wow.
This is so incredible.
Yeah, all those who were Christ were raised at his coming.
For this morning's morning musings.
All those who were Christ were raised at his coming, and then came the end, said Paul. Yet that light is going out to all nations, right? The fullness of the nations came in by the time of the coming, and all Israel was saved, said Paul. Yet that light is going out to all the nations, according to Don. Jesus said this gospel will go to all nations, and then the end would come. Yet that light is still going out to those nations today, said Don. We're going to jump forward to his part 3 now, take a couple minutes to look at it, and we're going to wrap this up, because really there's nothing powerful at all in Donnie's segments here.
Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And boy, I tell you, this week has just flown by. And, you know, isn't next week Christmas?
Yep. Crazy.
Yeah, don't ask me if I've done all my shopping, okay? My wife have this, and I have this kind of a mutual agreement. She sort of kind of buys what she wants and says, "Look what you bought me for Christmas." And I go, "Oh, I did a fantastic job of picking that out." You know, but it works for us. So anyway, it is what it is.
Let's
Five
bounce
foolish
forward
virgins.
here.
And I'm demonstrating, and I'm focusing on this chapter, on this parable, in order to demonstrate that the Olivet Discourse is not about the end of the age with the angels in a of coming of the Lord on the clouds, with about
Just
the
fast
need
forwarding.
that we have at Preterist Research Institute. Due to COVID and job losses, due to supporters getting sick, we've lost several $100s a month. You heard that, several $100s a month in monthly support.
How can this continue?
And as you well know,
How can Don continue to make free YouTube videos in his basement?
those of you who watch this program day after day after day after day, you know that I very, very seldom appeal for money.
I catch it on here every time I tune in, which isn't very much, but at least once or twice a year.
But the reality is, folks, I've got to be able to eat. I've got to be able, in our ministry, to continue to be able to pay the bills.
Well, not for nothing, but people work, right? I mean, you get a job, you get a paycheck, it feeds you, you pay the bills, you keep the lights on, that kind of thing. I don't know. Could just be me.
I am appealing to you, the viewers. We now have over 5,300 subscribers to this channel. Every single day, we have close to 500 or 600 views. That's in a day.
So pay up.
I want to ask you, if these videos are being a blessing in your life, if they are feeding you spiritually, then I would appeal to you that just as Paul said concerning the Jew-Gentile situation,
I'm just letting this go because it's interesting. I want to see how he ties this into giving money to him.
that since the Gentiles were partakers of the spiritual blessings of Israel,
Here we go.
that it was only right that they participate also in their physical blessings.
So you Gentiles need to hit that donate button.
And thus Paul urged the Romans to give and to support the giving of food and goods and money to the Gentiles.
So you guys got to give to Don because Don's a Gentile and you're a Gentile, and costs money to make videos in your basement and hit an upload button for free on YouTube, and it costs money to stay at home and write books all day. I mean, it costs money. It costs a lot of money. I mean, I don't know what he's doing with all the money, but it costs a lot of money.
I am asking that you please prayerfully consider supporting Preterist Research Institute. All contributions, whether
Are tax
single one-time
deductible.
or monthly support, are completely tax-free. The Bible says,
Oh, here we go.
the laborer is worthy of his hire.
Hold on, let me write this down.
And those who labor in the gospel
The gospel.
are to be supported
The gospel that went to all nations by the time of the coming. That gospel.
by the gospel. Well, guess what? That support doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from good people like you who believe and support what we are doing here on this program.
Folks, I have a program myself with over 1,000 subs, and I do it for free. I don't need any money. I work, right? Granted, I'm half Donnie's age, but the point is he's very, capable from his mind, at least. He's sharp-minded to go out and get himself a job, right? I know that COVID has probably struck him down a little bit, but he wasn't working a real job prior to this either. So, I mean, he's the one who decided that he would make and write books, and people are backing out of it. He might have had enough support at first, and then people back out of it, realize where it leads, and, granted, it is the truth, the fulfilled view, of course, but I think, like I said, a lot of people are starting to see that it is ultimately an IO story, and Don helps people to put those pieces together, and a lot of times they don't like that.
Single day, almost, every week, I bring you video after video after video.
Every week. Matthew 24, every week.
And again, I seldom ask for money. The time has come, I have to do that. So I'm asking you, once again, to prayerfully consider supporting Preterist Research Institute. Listen, if that's $15, $20 a month, that's wonderful, and we appreciate it. If you can give one-time contribution to help us out, we appreciate that. Anything and everything is appreciated. Please have us in your prayers.
Let's continue
We
on
cannot
with
continue
Isaiah
to lose
62.
support and continue to do
Don, would you just bless us with the gospel of Isaiah 62 already?
what we do. All right? Isaiah.
Okay, here we
chapter
go.
62.
What a blessing.
Notice, and I'm not going to go over again the motif of the salvation of Zion.
Okay.
Verse 2.
Here we go.
The Gentiles shall see your righteousness, and all kings your glory. You shall be called by a new name, which the mouth of the Lord will name. Okay, let's just stop right there.
Yeah, let's.
Let me remind you that the promise of the salvation of Zion, the restoration of Jerusalem, is not a promise of the restoration of just the 10 tribes. And it's not a promise of just the restoration of the 2 northern or southern tribes. It is a promise of the restoration of the whole house of Israel.
Okay, so all 12 tribes.
When the Lord says, I'm going to restore and remarry Zion, that's the promise of the restoration and the remarriage of the whole house of Israel.
Actually, Zion's
When
Jerusalem,
he
but
therefore turns
okay.
and says, the Gentiles shall see your who? Zion.
Jerusalem, Donnie. Jerusalem, like I said before. Jerusalem was going to be rebuilt, right? Her salvation, God was saving Jerusalem, and the Gentiles, which just simply means nations, right? Because the nations from afar would hear and see and speak of the glory of Jerusalem again. That's all it's saying. The Gentiles, the nations shall see your righteousness, and all kings your glory. All kings will see your glory. You shall be called by a new name, which the mouth of the Lord will name. You shall also be a crown of glory. Nor shall your land any more be termed desolate. Oh, God. For the Lord delights in you, and your land shall be married. Your land. He's speaking of the promised land, Jerusalem. And he goes on, he says, I have set watchmen on your walls, O Jerusalem. So he's talking to Jerusalem. He's not talking to, Donnie Boy today.
Restored Israel. Restored unto the Messiah. Reconstituted, reformed, recreated, redefined Israel. The Gentiles
Nations.
shall see your
Jerusalem.
righteousness.
And glory.
It doesn't say Israel will see her own righteousness. And it doesn't say Israel will
What a confusing mess.
see Judah's righteousness. And it doesn't say Judah will see Israel's righteousness.
It says the nations will see Jerusalem's glory. That's what it says.
It says the Gentiles will see the righteousness of Zion
Jerusalem.
that's restored
Yep.
the whole house of Israel.
So wait, the Gentiles would see the righteousness and restoration of the 12 tribes of Israel, Donnie says. Okay. He's like confused. He's thinking now, like, shit.
There is no Israel only in the text. There is a total
What?
annihilation of the Israel only doctrine right here in Isaiah 62.
My challenge still stands, folks. 5-part series. Get them to sign on.
1. There is the salvation of the whole house of Israel, and as a result of the salvation of the whole house of Israel, the Gentiles, who are clearly not being referred to as your. They are not being referred to as Zion. They are not being...
Folks, what did I show you before when I read through these few chapters quickly for you? I showed you that A, the Gentiles would see Jerusalem be rebuilt. B, the wealth of the Gentiles would come to Jerusalem, camels, gold, incense. Kings would bring it to them. I showed you C, that the Gentiles would build the walls of Jerusalem, and the sons and daughters of those Gentiles would tend to the fields and be the vine dressers of these Israelites, right? Like basically slaves. They would serve them is the whole purpose and point. So who's got the story correct here? Is it Donnie saying that somehow these Gentiles are partaking of this salvation? When I just showed you that everything Isaiah says in those chapters actually puts the Gentiles below these people, right? The wealth of the Gentiles will come to you, Jerusalem. The Gentiles shall see your glory, Jerusalem. The sons of the Gentiles shall serve you, Jerusalem. The sons of the Gentiles and the foreigners shall build your walls, Jerusalem. In other words, God is saving his people and bringing them back to that promised land, Jerusalem, right? That's all it's saying.
Referred to as Jerusalem. They are Gentiles, independent of, separate from, different from Zion, Jerusalem, the whole house of Israel. Now, I hated to take...
There's no sense of salvation for the Gentiles there whatsoever, at all. The salvation's going to Jerusalem first and foremost, and it's gathering in the sons and daughters, Jerusalem, the daughters of Zion, and sons of Zion from the nations, and the nations would witness this, and they would work and slave and toil to make it happen. Just check out Ezra and Nehemiah.
I hate to even have to take the time to mention that. But this ungodly doctrine of Israel only.
Oh, here we go. I didn't even know this was in here. This is good. He usually doesn't even say the term because he knows that people actually catch on to it.
Doesn't even know how to do exegesis.
Oh, okay.
They abuse hermeneutic in ways that are literally unimaginable.
Really? That's usually what people say when something's too true to refute.
They do not deal with the scriptures appropriately,
okay,
honestly, and with integrity.
5-part exchange. The challenge stands.
Here we have Zion and Jerusalem demanding that it's the whole house of Israel. And independent from that, different from that, the Gentiles.
What about them?
Receive salvation.
The Gentiles would receive salvation, folks. You heard it. You heard it.
Now, how does that play into?
The Gentiles seeing Jerusalem's righteousness and glory does not equate to Gentile salvation. That wouldn't make any sense. Gentiles were not in need of Yahweh's salvation. Jerusalem, the desolate city that was laid waste, and the people who were captive in the nations, desiring to go home and have the law again, those are the ones who would need salvation. This is just common sense.
Matthew 25. Well, because all of this is put at the time of the coming of the Lord for the wedding. And did you know?
Did you know?
That in the Jewish narrative,
okay,
even though there was some resistance to it, to be sure, did you realize that the Jews realized and taught for 1,500 years that when Israel received her blessings, that the nations, the Gentiles, those not of the 12 tribes, would also be invited into the kingdom?
I'd like to see what he's talking about there. Of course, he's not talking about the Bible, because the Bible's very exclusively I.O., but he's making mention that Jews for 1,500 years, such a very broad statement there, right? I would challenge him to produce evidence of that, right? And let's see. Not that it's going to prove anything, because the Jews have had many, many, many hundreds of different, maybe if not thousands of different conflicting ideas on the kingdom and nations and what's allowed and what isn't and what's the law and what isn't. So there really is no final authority on this. But Donnie's making the claim that the Jews would receive their kingdom first and then it would go out to the Gentiles. So I'd like to see the literature that he's pointing to in that regard.
That was the Jewish narrative for 1,500 years. And yet we are being told
Where's the proof?
by the Israel-only group
Yeah.
that for 1,500 years, the Jews in Israel had
The Jews and Israel.
no idea who the Gentiles were.
Huh?
They had no idea who the Allogenes, those not of the tribes. They
What?
had no idea who the Allotrios, foreigners, were.
This isn't making any sense.
They had no idea who the Allophiles, those not of the tribes.
He just said that.
They were just dumber than a box of rocks.
Huh?
They always thought they were Israel, and those not of the lineage of Abraham, they always thought those were the Gentiles. Man,
What?
how dumb could you get, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel dumb listening to that. Does anybody follow anything that he just said? I mean, he went off on a little rant there, and it made no sense whatsoever. I hope he clears it up for us here.
No, right here, Isaiah 62.
Back to,
1 and
okay.
2.
I guess that's all we get.
Salvation of Zion, Jerusalem, the whole house of Israel, and the Gentiles. Now, all of this,
Again, I showed you what the Gentiles were doing in that context, and it was anything but salvation. It was seeing the righteousness and glory of Jerusalem, building her walls, and serving the people of Israel.
is related to the coming of the Lord for the time of the wedding. Because all of this is put into the same time frame when Jerusalem would be restored. Zion would be glorified. But that's going to be the ultimate consummation of that is at the coming of the Lord for the wedding, which is Matthew 25, 1 to 13. And that means the Olivet Discourse cannot be divided. The Olivet Discourse, in other words, is not about God having cast off Israel and marrying the church. No such distinction. It is about God's promises to the whole house of Israel to restore her, to recreate her into a new creation
This is getting good. Let's see how he ties the Gentiles in.
in and under Messiah, and to invite any nation, all nation, to participate in that salvation.
So, all those who were Christ were raised at his coming. The fullness of the nations came in, and all Israel was saved, said Paul. The gospel went to all nations, and then the end came, said Jesus. And yet, Don comes out with this narrative that says, sure, the gospel was for the 12 tribes first, but then it goes out to everybody. But I thought all those who were Christ were raised at his coming, and then came the end. You see, Donnie is stuck between a rock and a hard place because the New Testament doesn't teach anything that he teaches, right? Clearly, the elect, the chosen ones, the ones marked out with the Holy Spirit, soared up to heaven at the end in the final scene. They went bye-bye. They're not here anymore. They're not evangelizing. They're not bringing the gospel. It's a supernatural tale, and all those who are Christ would be raised and ascended up into heaven in glorified, Christ-like, never-die, immortal bodies, changed and brought to an age to come where Jesus said there would be no more death, no more pain, no more tears, no more marriage, no more giving in marriage, and they'd be like angels in heaven. So Donnie's up against a real tough spot here. He's backed up against the wall. He's got nowhere to go, and he knows it. And so when he tells people there's this like twofold gospel thing, like it went to the 12 tribes first. So really, I guess he is agreeing that the Gentiles of Paul were the 12 tribes because he just said it goes to the 12 tribes first, then the nations. So how does it work, right? Who's the other 10 tribes in the gospel mission, right? Because you have the Jews, but where are the 10 tribes? They're actually the Gentiles, okay? He would have to admit that, I guess, because he just said that it first restores the whole house, all 12 tribes, and then it goes out to the Gentiles. So I don't know what type of wacky thing he's doing, but he's doing what most preterists do, and they're inventing some new theology or new form of understanding of the gospel, like part 2 or something. But it's clearly just a cop-out and a way to try to get butts and seats and skin in the game. But as I've showed, Isaiah 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, the new heaven, new earth of 65, the Levites and priests coming back to the restored city of 66. It's all about the second temple restored Jerusalem period. And yes, the New Testament writers do pull from that. They pull little snippets of that to explain that Israel is, yes, now being restored to an even newer Jerusalem up in the heavens, made without hands. Yes, they do that, but they're not doing it like Donnie says they're doing it. They're not mentioning something from an Old Testament portion and expecting you to believe that literally all the details of that chapter are coming to pass in that day. No, that chapter back then was about something that took place in their history with their ancestors that they knew of. And it's called remez, I believe it is. R-E-M-E-Z, perhaps. It's a technique where they refer to Old Testament passages to give the understanding or to help explain what's happening in their day. But you can bet your bottom dollar that it is still relevant only to Israel. The salvation was still only for Israel. And that's why they and they alone are standing in heaven in Revelation 14. And it says that nobody but them could sing of salvation because they were the ones redeemed from the earth. Doesn't get any more clearer than that, folks. So anyways, we're going to leave it at that. Donnie's done for today in his video on this section, which is number 358. I don't feel the need to go any further. I feel like Donnie's arguments are very washed up. They're weak. They're elementary. He misses the entire historical context and setting of these prophets. And he forces himself on spiritual camels and spiritual donkeys here in 2020. So it's really kind of pitiful, to be honest. But anyways, I thank you guys for joining me. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to give it a like. Leave a comment in the comments. That also helps the video a little bit. Even if you disagree, I'd love to hear from you. I will in no way, shape, or form block you like some cowards out there do, or censor you, unless you're a pain in the ass. Then I just give you the boot. But for the most part, I welcome objections and I welcome criticism. And to date, I haven't found anything that would sway me off this course. So stay tuned, folks. Part 3 of Richard Carrier's humiliation and refutation is coming out soon, and we'll wrap that series up as well. I hope everybody has a great day out there. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
I'm a blaster. I can go slow, go faster. If I bust quick, that's a bastard. Young Bollywood, get cash up, get rich, quick, big bag, young cash up. Ice on my neck, that's incoming. I'm a pretty boy, I'm stunning. Super speed Sonic, I'm running. Super speed Sonic, I'm running. Call me Big Papa, I'm Sonic. I spot the dick when she want it. I'm a bad boy, make lovin'. I'm a bad boy, make lovin'. I'm a bad boy like Puffy, sucking on my neck.